Welcome to our next podcast episode. Today, we are taking a really deep dive into the hidden engine room of the property world.
Right, because, have you ever looked at a soaring skyscraper or, an empty dirt lot in downtown San Francisco and wondered why that patch of dirt is worth more than a fully functioning office building in the Midwest?
It is a great question, and decoding those invisible forces is exactly our mission today. We are breaking down a highly insightful book called Real Estate Economics by Willem Tait. The goal here is to give you an executive-level shortcut to understanding the mechanics that dictate why cities evolve and why markets shift.
Exactly. And before we get into the core strategies, it is important to understand the author's background. Willem Tait is an established author with a very diverse portfolio of multiple books. He is a management consultant, an enterprise strategist, and a retained advisory specialist.
Yeah, he is also heavily involved as a coach, a mentor, and a public speaker. And if you want to explore his offerings or his professional consultancy, the most direct way is via the Linktree URL located in the bio of this podcast.
Right. That link tree will take you straight to his research papers on academia.edu, as well as his regular writing on medium.com and substack.com.
And I should mention, his books are available worldwide. You can find them at Amazon, Apple Books, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Bull.com, Waterstones, Exclusive Books, and really all major retailers.
Plus, you can always request or message your local librarian to acquire the book, or just check digital apps like Overdrive, Libby, Hoopla, or Odilo, where it might actually be available for free.
Definitely. So let us jump right into this executive breakdown. In this book, Tate outlines a concept that really changes how you look at property. We have to start with the baseline of all economics, right? Supply and demand.
But viewed through a very specific real estate lens. Because the crucial concept to grasp immediately is that real estate is an inelastic market.
Right.
In a normal elastic market, supply stretches to meet demand almost instantly. If a celebrity wears a new brand of sneaker and suddenly 1 million people want to buy it, the factory just adds another shift, spins up the machines, and floods the market with sneakers in a few weeks.
Okay, let us unpack that, because real estate is obviously very different. It is more like ordering a custom-built car from scratch.
Precisely.
When demand spikes, say, a new tech sector brings thousands of high-paying jobs to a city, you cannot just 3D print a new neighborhood. The supply response takes years. You have to acquire land, get environmental reports, fight through zoning boards, and secure financing before you ever pour the concrete.
What is fascinating here is how Tate's approach highlights the time delay. That lag is the defining feature of the market. Because of that multi-year delay, the supply of housing is always reacting to what the market wanted 3 years ago, not what it needs today.
Wow, yeah. And his writing reflects this perfectly when he looks at the California housing crisis as a case study. Let us look at the mechanics there. Everyone knows California is notoriously expensive, but the underlying gears turning that machine are really revealing.
Right, because you do not just have high demand. You have an environment that actively strangles supply. You have a geographical bottleneck, mountains on one side, the ocean on the other.
And that collides with incredibly restrictive local zoning laws.
Exactly. In many California cities, local residents can easily block new high-density developments through endless environmental reviews and community pushback. Add in the highest construction and labor costs in the country, and the barrier to entry for building a new apartment complex is just monumental.
So that is the supply side. But then
Yeah.
on the demand side, you have this massive economic engine driving high-income job growth, intense urbanization, and, a constant influx of people wanting that specific climate.
The inevitable result is a chronic, severe shortage. Demand completely overwhelms the slow, inelastic supply. The power shifts entirely to the seller.
Which is what we call a seller's market.
Exactly. Buyers are forced into bidding wars, waiving contingencies, and paying huge premiums just to get a foot in the door.
It is basically a game of musical chairs, where someone keeps taking away the chairs while more people enter the room.
That is a great way to put it. And the reverse scenario happens when developers misjudge the future. If they start building aggressively during a boom, and the economy suddenly cools down by the time those projects finish 3 years later, well, you end up with a buyer's market.
Great, because now there is a surplus of empty homes, and prices have to fall to clear the inventory.
Exactly. Because supply is so sluggish, the market is incredibly sensitive to sudden changes in the broader economy, and this creates the famous real estate roller coaster, or market cycles.
So what does this all mean for the average investor? How do we track this roller coaster?
Well, the book categorizes this into 4 distinct phases. First is expansion. Job growth is strong, people have money, demand increases, and property prices start climbing. Developers see the profits and start breaking ground on new projects.
And then we hit the peak.
Right. At the peak, prices have climbed so high that affordability becomes a severe issue. People simply get priced out. At the same time, all those projects developers started during the expansion phase are finally finishing and hitting the market. Supply catches up to and then exceeds demand.
And that tips the cart over the hill into the contraction phase.
Yes. Homes sit on the market longer, sellers have to start cutting prices, and vacancy rates in apartment buildings go up. Developers slam the brakes on any new projects.
Until we eventually bottom out.
Exactly, the trough. Prices stagnate, construction is essentially zero, but eventually housing becomes affordable enough, again, to entice buyers back in, which slowly restarts the expansion phase.
Okay, so the mechanism controlling the speed of this entire cycle, as the book points out, is interest rates. I actually like to think of central bank interest rates as the thermostat for the entire property market.
That is a very accurate analogy.
If central banks lower rates, they are turning up the heat. Borrowing money becomes incredibly cheap, mortgages are highly affordable, and everyone gets financially comfortable. They rush out to buy, which drives prices up.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, taking that metaphor further, because real estate supply is inelastic, turning up the heat is like blasting the furnace in a house with all the windows painted shut.
Oh, wow. The heat has nowhere to go.
Right. The supply cannot vent the demand, so the temperature inside just gets dangerously hot. That is exactly how a bubble forms.
Conversely, if the central bank raises interest rates, they turn the thermostat down. Borrowing gets expensive. Even if the sticker price of a house stays the same, a 2% jump in interest rates can add hundreds of dollars to a monthly payment. Purchasing power drops overnight, and the market freezes over.
The book illustrates this beautifully by comparing the 2008 financial crisis to the COVID-19 housing boom. In 2008, the market had reached a speculative peak fueled by subprime mortgages. When those risky loans defaulted, it caused a massive internal collapse. Foreclosures flooded the market with distressed supply, driving values into a deep trough.
So that was a completely internally generated catastrophe. But the COVID-19 pandemic, that was an external shock. In early 2020, GDP contracted sharply, businesses shuttered, and unemployment spiked. Traditional economic logic says the housing market should have cratered.
But central banks around the world stepped in and slashed interest rates to near zero. They turned the thermostat to maximum heat. The cost of debt became virtually non-existent.
So even though the broader economy was in turmoil, people suddenly had access to the cheapest mortgage money in modern history. Combine that with the sudden desire for more space because everyone was working from home, and you get a massive global housing boom right in the middle of a pandemic.
The cheap debt completely overrode the shrinking GDP. We often assume real estate is governed by raw, uncontrollable economic forces. But the reality is that policymakers have their hands firmly on the dials. Governments act as massive rulemakers in two specific ways, as regulators and as participants.
Let us talk about the regulatory side first, because the book points out that governments can actually step in and kill a dangerous bubble without destroying their own economy. If a market is overheating, are local citizens just helpless against foreign capital flooding in?
Singapore provides one of the most effective blueprints for this in the book. In the early 2010s, their property market was overheating at an alarming rate. International investors and speculators were using real estate as a wealth haven, artificially driving up prices and pricing local residents out of their own country.
A classic case of demand entirely disconnected from the local median income. So how do you fix that without crashing the banking system?
The Singaporean government implemented aggressive cooling measures. They introduced massive additional buyer stamp duties. Imagine being a foreign investor and being told you have to pay a 30% or 40% tax on the purchase price just for the privilege of buying the property.
Well, that destroys a profit margin for a quick flip instantly.
Exactly the point. They also tightened loan-to-value limits, meaning buyers could not leverage as much bank debt. They had to put down significantly more of their own cash. By targeting speculative demand directly, they successfully cooled the market and stabilized prices.
Ensuring housing remained attainable for actual residents. That is the government aggressively regulating. But they also act as participants by building the infrastructure that dictates value. The book highlights London's Crossrail project, this massive new high-speed railway network.
Infrastructure is the circulatory system of a city. When a government commits billions to a new transit line, they're essentially relocating wealth. Areas surrounding the new Crossrail stations experienced tremendous property value appreciation. A neighborhood that was once an hour away from London's financial center was suddenly a 20-minute ride away.
Right, and time is money, so the market prices that convenience directly into the real estate. But I want to pause here on the math because this is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, where a lot of people get lost.
Okay.
I can wrap my head around pricing a house. You look at comps. If a three-bedroom house near the new station just sold for a premium, my similar three-bedroom house is probably worth the same. But how do you value a 40-story office building or a massive shopping mall? You cannot just find three identical skyscrapers that sold last Tuesday.
You are exactly right. The sales comparison approach breaks down completely for commercial real estate.
Yeah.
Instead, professionals rely on the income approach.
Yep.
Commercial real estate is valued strictly as a financial asset based entirely on the cash flow it generates. The first metric you determine is the net operating income, or NOI. You take all the revenue the building generates from rent and subtract all the operating expenses: maintenance, taxes, insurance.
So the NOI is basically the pure profit the building spits out every year.
Exactly. Once you have the NRI, you apply a capitalization rate, commonly called a cap rate. The cap rate is essentially the market's risk thermometer. It reflects the rate of return an investor expects for taking on the risk of buying that property.
Wait, run that by me again. If my office building clears $100,000 a year in pure profit, my NOI, how did the cap rate magically turn that into a multi-million-dollar valuation?
It is a simple division formula. You take the NOI and divide it by the cap rate to equal the property value. Let us say investors view your building as very safe. It is fully leased in a great location near that new Crossrail station. They might accept a lower return because the risk is low.
Okay, that makes sense.
Let us use a 5% cap rate. You divide your $100,000 NOI by 0.05, and your building is valued at $2 million.
But if my building is in a declining neighborhood with tenants constantly moving out, that is a huge risk.
Investors will demand a higher return to compensate for that risk. So the cap rate goes up to, say, 10%. Now, you divide that same $100,000 NOI by 0.10, and your building is only worth $1 million.
Wow.
The profit did not change, but the perceived risk cut the valuation in half.
That changes the entire perspective. The valuation is not a stagnant number on a spreadsheet. It is a real-time measurement of human behavior. It quantifies how safe investors feel, how much they value convenience, and how they perceive the future of that specific neighborhood.
Taking that a step further, once you understand how local cap rates work, you start looking across borders. In his book, Tait explains that global real estate is heavily driven by cross-border investments. Why settle for a 5% return in London when you might find a 9% cap rate in an emerging market? Institutional capital and high net worth individuals are constantly moving money to diversify and chase better yields.
But this brings up a massive logistical hurdle. If I want to buy a luxury high-rise apartment in a foreign country, the local banks there have no idea who I am. They cannot pull my domestic credit score, and verifying my income from a completely different tax system sounds like a nightmare.
The financial industry solved this through asset-backed mortgages, or ABMs. With an ADM, the lender underwrites the loan based almost entirely on the value and income potential of the property itself, rather than the personal income history of the borrower.
Hold on, isn't that incredibly reckless? We saw what happened in 2008 when banks stopped verifying income. They called them NINJ loans. No income, no job, no assets. Why would a bank in Dubai or London lend millions to a foreign investor without checking their pay stubs? Doesn't that just invite a crash?
The difference lies in the equity. In 2008, people were buying homes with zero money down, meaning they had no skin in the game. If the market dipped, they just walked away. With international asset-backed mortgages, banks mitigate the risk by requiring massive down payments, often 40 to 50% in cash.
So the bank is essentially saying, we do not care about your tax forms because if you default, we instantly seize a prime asset that you already paid half for.
Exactly. The collateral is incredibly secure. It allows international capital to bypass strict local banking hurdles. However, it introduces a completely different threat currency risk.
Right. This is the hidden trapdoor in international investing.
Let us say you buy a property abroad, and the numbers look fantastic. But you are earning your income in your home currency and paying a mortgage in a foreign currency. If your home currency depreciates by 15% against the foreign currency, your monthly mortgage payment just became 15% more expensive.
Wow.
The interest rate did not move, the cap rate did not change, but the exchange rate alone can entirely wipe out your profit margin.
So you have to master not just real estate economics, but global macroeconomic trends. And those trends vary wildly depending on the philosophy of the market you are entering. In the back matter of the book, there is a brilliant contrast between Dubai and Tokyo.
Two cities operating on completely different ends of the economic spectrum. Dubai is designed for hypergrowth. The government actively uses aggressive tax incentives, long-term visa reforms, and rapid infrastructure expansion to pull international capital into the desert. The market is dynamic, highly volatile, and built on the premise of constant outward expansion.
Then you look at Tokyo, a city in a country with a declining birth rate and a rapidly aging population. By all conventional logic, a shrinking population should mean falling housing demand and crashing property values.
Yet Tokyo's property market remains robust and stable. The secret is their approach to zoning and redevelopment. Unlike California, where local neighborhoods can block construction, Japan manages zoning at the national level. The rules are incredibly permissive.
So they do not have to fight a local council for 5 years just to replace a duplex with an apartment building.
The friction is removed. Instead of sprawling outward, Tokyo constantly tears down and rebuilds its existing inventory to higher densities and modern standards. People still desperately want to live in the core of the city. Because developers can build freely to meet that demand, housing remains relatively affordable, and the market stays liquid despite the demographic challenges.
We have covered the mechanics of the present, but where is this invisible engine room heading? We were sitting here talking about zoning boards and cap rates, but I mean, I can pull out my phone right now and buy a fractional share of a commercial building in another hemisphere in 3 clicks. Is technology going to render all these traditional rules obsolete?
This raises an important question. Tait's approach to the future shows that technology does not erase the fundamental rules of supply and demand. It supercharges them. The most disruptive force the book points to is the integration of big data and AI in predictive analytics. Investors are no longer guessing where the path of progress will go based on instinct.
They're using data to front-run the demand.
Yes. AI models ingest cell phone mobility data, credit card spending patterns, and even social media sentiment to forecast micro-neighborhood trends with staggering accuracy. They know a neighborhood is gentrifying before the local residents even realize it. Institutional investors use this data to buy up assets before the supply can possibly react.
The other massive shift is the environmental mandate, the push for net zero buildings.
This is no longer just a corporate social responsibility talking point. It is a hard economic metric. Governments are beginning to mandate severe carbon reduction targets. Soon, a building's carbon footprint will directly alter its cap rate. An older office building that is inefficient to heat and cool will suffer what the industry calls a brown discount.
Meaning its operating expenses will skyrocket due to environmental penalties, driving its NOI down and destroying its valuation.
Meanwhile, highly sustainable net zero buildings will command a green premium.
And we have to factor in the wild card of decentralized urbanization. The remote work revolution broke the historic link between the commercial office hub and the residential commuter belt. If you only need to be in a downtown office once a month, you do not need to pay the premium to live near the Crossrail station.
That shifts demand away from hyper-expensive urban cores and redistributes it into suburbs and secondary cities. Developers are having to fundamentally rewrite their playbooks on where they acquire land because the geographic center of economic gravity is fragmenting. Combine that with the fractional ownership models you mentioned, which allow a retail investor to own $500 worth of a medical facility in Texas. And the barriers to entering the commercial cap rate game are dissolving.
The democratization of commercial real estate. It's a massive paradigm shift. Tying this all back to you listening right now, why should you care about cap rates, inelastic supply, or national versus local zoning laws? Because these are the invisible forces deciding the reality of your daily life. They dictate the size of your rent increase next year. They determine whether your city council approves a new park or a new high-rise, and exactly what your neighborhood will look like a decade from now.
A physical building is just a manifestation of the capital, policy, and human behavior that willed it into existence. When you understand the mechanics of the engine room, you stop seeing just concrete and glass. You start seeing the flow of global economics. And that kind of literacy is a profound advantage in managing your own career, your purchases, and your long-term wealth.
It really changes the way you walk down the street. So we will leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over. For centuries, the golden rule of real estate has been location, location, location. But as virtual reality allows us to tour global properties from our living rooms, as fractional ownership turns skyscrapers into digital stocks, and as AI predicts the next booming neighborhood before a single brick is laid, what does location even mean in a decentralized, digital-first world?
That is a question that will redefine the next century of development.
Absolutely. And as a quick reminder, you can secure Willem Tait's book at global retailers like Amazon and Waterstones, or check your local library apps.
And do not forget to check the link tree in the show notes to connect with Willem for his professional advisory services.
We look forward to many more analytical sessions hereafter on his wider publication portfolio. Keep following the podcast feed for our upcoming masterclasses, and thank you for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.